Hey scholars, in this video I'm going to go more in depth into teaching you about concept. I went over it briefly in my story and introduction video, or I think it's actually titled How to Write a Story. So if you haven't seen that video, I suggest to watch that one first before watching this one. But if you did watch that video, or you feel confident about concept and you want to learn a little bit more, let's get started. So I have here start with character when you want to write a concept. Why do I say start with character? I say start with character because story, as it's written there on the screen, it's essentially a series of conflict, and conflict doesn't exist without a character, right? Without two people. And in some stories there's an antagonist and a protagonist. Some stories don't have antagonists, but you know, you need to start always with, I would say, a person, right? Characters are the ones who drive stories, right? And they are the source of conflict, pretty much. Characters are the source of conflict. And since story is a series of conflict, we need a character. So that is the best place to start. And I wrote a little tip here. It says, to make the process even easier, you can think of a character who automatically has a conflict. And this is the example we're going to be using throughout the series. An unsung musician. Now, how is an unsung musician, how is that inherently conflicting, right? When we see here an unsung musician. Well, what does unsung mean? It simply means unknown, right? So our character is an unknown musician. And if you are a musician by trade, and that is your only job, and no one knows who you are, that's a problem. So here we have a musician who's unknown, and that's his only job. So this is already a character who has a problem. And you don't always have to start with characters who already have a problem. I just think sometimes if you want to write something and you don't know what to write, the easiest thing to do is start with a character who already has a problem. Let's keep going. Okay, goals. Internal and external. If you remember from my last video, I said that concepts have to have goals, right? Your concept has to include a goal. And here I'm talking a little, this is kind of like development, but here I want to talk to you a little bit about the difference between goals, because there's two types of goals. There's internal goals and there's external goals. And to me, you can read this here, to me the best stories, and this is just my opinion, not every story is written in this way, but to me the best story are the stories where characters have this internal desire and then they take outward steps to fulfill that internal desire, right? I think, in my opinion, those are the most relatable stories. And of course in every story we do see characters who have internal desires, but often, or in some stories, those internal desires don't develop until something happens, which would be like, and you'll see in my development video, would be the inciting incident. Like once the inciting incident happens, well then the character has an internal desire, right? To do something, and then that's what motivates them to accomplish their goal. But when the story starts with the character who has an internal desire and then continues and develops in a way where we see this character fulfilling that internal thing that they want, to me, I think those are the best stories. I'll give you an example, and let me go over it a little bit briefly. There is a movie called Jerry Maguire. It's an old movie. So maybe my young learners have not seen it. And that movie is rated R, really just for one scene. But you know, it's rated R, and don't watch that movie without a parent, right? If you are under the age of 17, okay? And in the movie Jerry Maguire is a sports agent. So he represents athletes and he helps athletes get contracts. And in the beginning of the movie, we see that he is very discouraged with the agency that he works for because they only really care about making money. They don't really care about the athletes that they represent. And Jerry has this desire to have a meaningful relationship with the athletes that he represents. So he writes this mission statement, and I'm not ruining anything here. This happens all in the beginning of the movie. He writes this mission statement and he sends it out, right? He stays up all night writing it. He was very emotional when he wrote it. He stays up all night writing it, and then he sends it out to everyone who works at the agency, and eventually he gets fired because although his peers in the agency liked what he said, his bosses, of course, kind of corporate, they just cared about making money, and so they fired him because they weren't on the same page. And when they fired him, he had to start from nothing, right? He didn't lose that desire to continue he didn't lose the desire. He still wanted to be a sports agent, right? He still wanted to be a sports agent, so he started his own agency from nothing, right? From nothing. He only had one client, and he had to build from there to create to fulfill what he wanted, which was to have a sports agency that didn't only care about making money, but cared about what was more important, which is being a meaningful person in their client's life. And I would just say that there, right? Being a meaningful person in their client's life, and not just a person who makes them money. And of course, there's a love component to that movie, right? Which makes all stories great, right? When we add a little bit of love to it. So that was kind of my example, and I could break it down for you even more. So his desire, I'll just sum it up again. His desire was to have an agency that cared about their clients. When he gets fired, he creates his own agency where he's gonna fulfill that desire, and he starts from ground zero to do that. And we see him do that in the movie. And my example here, I have an unsung musician desires to land a record deal. Now, I know that sounds super cliche, but remember, this is just concept. It doesn't have to be perfect. So in my next video premise, you're gonna see how this really cliche desire actually becomes less cliche and more unique and meaningful. But you have to start somewhere. So even though this is really cliche, look, there's tons of movies where if I were to break it down into simply the concept, they all sound the same. But it's the way that the writers choose to develop those stories that make them different. And of course, we see a little bit more development in premise. So we can take a very cliche with concept. We can start with something that's very cliche, and then when we're developing our premise, make it very unique. But that's for another video. Let's keep going. Obstacles. Super important when you're writing story, when you're doing development, and also you have to think about it when you are writing concept, right? You have to think of the main obstacle when you're doing your concept, right? And I wrote here for you to understand how important obstacles are. An obstacle is like a gas pedal. It makes your story go. It makes your story go. If your story doesn't have obstacles, you don't have a story. Okay? And I also wrote here, because I do see a lot of young writers do this. Never create conflict for the sake of conflict. Every single thing your character faces has to add up to the conclusion. If it doesn't, take it out. Your story has to make sense. And you can't just put conflict in there because you know it has to have conflict. The conflict that you make your character go through, or the conflict that you put in your story, has to move the story forward. If that scene of conflict that you write does not move your story forward, does not help your story progress in any way whatsoever, it is unnecessary. So take it out. Okay? Before I read the example, I had to think here. Before I read the example, I want to read this quote that I have here. You might be thinking, why do I have a quote by Robert Kennedy here? And if you're one of my young learners and you don't know who Robert Kennedy is, he is not, or was not, a writer. He was a politician. And I'm not going one way or the other here. I'm not trying to sway you one way or the other. I just like this quote. So it says, only those who dare to fail greatly can ever achieve greatly. And I included this quote, and I wanted to include this quote because your characters need to dare to fail greatly, right? In writing, we call that raising the stakes. When you put your character in a position where they're more likely to fail than to succeed, that makes for a very great story. And that's actually pretty engaging, because who doesn't want to watch someone try and do something that's near impossible? Isn't, like, I don't know if you've got, that's also another pretty old movie, Rudy, right? Just look up Rudy. And that's actually based on a true story. Rudy did this thing that was like near impossible. It was crazy, and it's I don't know it's a sports movie for my male writers, or I don't know. I'm a girl and I love sports, so if you love sports, Rudy is one of the best sports movies of all times. I don't know a sports fan who doesn't like that movie. I'm sure there are, but I would say most love that movie. And yeah, you need to put your characters in position when you do put them through obstacles, they need to fail, right? They need to fail, because we need to see they need to fail, and then they need to overcome. Because if you put your character through an obstacle and they never fail, well, what do we have there? Like that is a character that no one can relate to, because we all fail in life. So like, when you're writing obstacles, make sure that your character fails and then ultimately succeeds, right? Or not, I don't know, whatever you want. But make sure there are moments in your story where your character is failing. That's very important, right? And then my example here that we're going to use throughout the series is an unsung musician battles financial hardship and unwavering rejection. Of course, again, that sounds very cliche, but you're going to see how in the premise, I take these really cliche things and make them a lot more unique. Okay, so this is how you write a concept. This is how you would put it all together. So if you don't remember from the previous slides, character, an unsung musician. Goal, an unsung musician desires to land a record deal. Obstacle, an unsung musician battles financial hardship and unwavering rejection. So when you're putting this all together, you're always going to start with character. Kind of like how I started this little lecture here, right? So you're always going to start with character, an unsung musician, and then you're going to go to the obstacle. You're going to write the obstacle. Battles financial hardship, so just like how I have it here. An unsung musician, ooh, you might not see it, because I know that the screen where you're seeing me might be covering this. The way I wrote it, I'm going to write it just in case you can't see it. An unsung musician battles financial hardship and unwavering rejection as he tirelessly tries to land a record deal. So, you're going to start with character. An unsung musician battles financial hardship. Oh, I'm sorry, an unsung musician. I got ahead of myself there. Start with character. An unsung musician. Then you're going to go to obstacle. Battles financial hardship and unwavering rejection. And then you're gonna, like, the last thing you're gonna write is the goal, as he tirelessly tries to land a record deal. I'm gonna say it for the third time. I know how cliche this sounds. I know. In my next video, when I go over premise, you're gonna see how this very cliche concept becomes something that is a lot more engaging and unique. Okay? I don't think I have another slide here. I don't. I'm going to sum up. When you create your concept, you need to write a character, right? I would start with character, okay? When you create your concept, start with character. If you're having a hard time moving on from there, start with a character who inherently has a problem. Then you're going to think about the obstacles that they face, right? And really you're going to think about the main obstacle that they have to do, right? What is the main... You can also think about goal, right? What is... You can think about obstacle and goal at the same time. So you don't have to think about it in that order. That's just how I thought about it. So you can have a character, an unsung musician, and you can think of the goal afterward, what they want, and then you can think of the main thing they have to overcome to get it. That actually might be a better way for you to think about it. You could do it either way. The way I originally taught it, which is character and then obstacle and then goal. Or you can think about character, goal, and then obstacle, the way it's written here. Whatever works for you, okay? That would conclude today's lesson. Thank you so much for being part of this class, and I will see you next class.